Good evening to one and all. Very happy to welcome you all to yet another edition of Able Talk. And in the series of enabling parents to empower young adults with disabilities, today we are going to focus on the academic learning of children, that is, empowering parents to facilitate the academic learning of their children. This is the topic for today's webinar. And as always, a little about Able Aura before I introduce the guest speaker of the day. Able Aura is India's largest ecosystem for PWDs, and Able Aura aims at empowering uh, persons with disabilities to lead an enabled life by availing products and services that they may need in a single digital platform, in a single click. At Abelora, we have also recently launched our Abelora Academy, where we are enabling and empowering kids with disabilities and young adults with disabilities to achieve their sporting dreams and take sports as a career. Also, when talking about sports, we as a company, we have among us in our team a lot of national and international sports persons in the field of football who also participated in the Tamil Nadu Blind Football Association tournament held recently, and they came out with flying colors. Also, we participated and represented in the race for prevention of rare diseases very recently, and we are an inclusive workplace, and we have 25% and all of us are very lucky to belong to Tribe Abelora. So that's little about Abelora. So coming back to the faculty of the day, Dr. Dasaratha Rama. And yes, Dr. Dasaratha Rama is a professor and parent of 25-year-old Anand. She is the developer of the lifesmart philosophy and approach, an approach that emphasizes four interrelated components, that is learning daily, interests, family interactions, and engagement with the community. She has homeschooled Anand, who's a person with autism, for many years. Her educational approach has been shaped by Waldorf and Enke approaches that are movement rich, arts integrated, and storytelling oriented approaches to learning, as well as by RDI, that is relationship development intervention approach. She is also a certified leader in systems thinking, mapping, and a leadership under a program offered by Cabrera Research Lab. She is also pursuing her PhD Theatre Arts for Holistic Development at Rasa Ramanasundrityalaya Trust. So, presenting Dr. Dasaratha Rama to the forum. Over to you, ma'am.
Good evening. Very happy to be here today. It's actually a very good time for me because I've been working on what LifeSmart and some of the other related tools and everything for the last several years. And it's only in the last few months that everything has really crystallized and come to a point where I'm really eager to present it. So I'd actually like to use a screen for presenting. Archana, can I present or?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Sure, sure, ma'am. Sorry.
Okay. Okay, can you see the screen, Archana and
No,
others?
ma'am.
No, you
No,
can.
ma'am. No, ma'am.
Okay, wait, let's see. Okay. Uh, does it appear now or?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So are you seeing the ebook?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes.
So let me get started. I just wanted to use the ebook, which I will also share after the presentation. But what I wanted to say is that even though the topic is facilitate academic learning or empower parents to do academic learning, it's really not something I would advise at least parents of younger children to start with. So this was a kind of a difficult lesson for a family where three of us are academics. My husband and I are both professors, and so is our older son. So when Anant was in kindergarten and we just were finding out about some of the challenges, we also started relationship development intervention. And one of the first things we learned was to let go of academics. So coming from India with this great emphasis on academics, that was not easy, but it was something really a good thing to do. So the first, so this is kind of our logo, and the shift that I'd like to encourage people to think about is focus on experiences rather than skills and academic success. Well, academic success can come, but if your child cannot even have any, uh, ordinary experiences, cannot go to the store, cannot do things with the family, then really academic success is probably not where you want to focus. So that is the first point. So I talk about it as bridging the experience gap rather than bridging the skills gap, and more on that later. So this is a brief summary of Anand's journey with some key moments. The first one was when we started relationship development intervention. It put us on a good path because we were able to shift from actually going to academics to seeing what exactly needed to be done to develop the relational skills, to develop other foundational skills that were needed for long-term success in life. Then we found Enki education, which was an approach based on Waldorf. And we started using storytelling, theater arts kind of experiences as part of the daily education. Movement was a very big part of Enki education as well. So the combination of RDI and Enki shaped our homeschooling approach. We were never very much into books and workbooks. This is what Anant needed. He needed lots of movement and he needed a lot of experiences of different kinds. A pivotal point in our journey was when we found Mascotova neurosensory motor reflex integration, MNRI. Until then, even though we were doing some good experiences with RDI and Enki and so on, the motor system was still an issue. Anant had significant sensory motor challenges. And until we started MNRI, we were not able to address that very well. After MNRI, fortunately, he decided he liked Bharatanatyam, and Dr. Maskatova was actually the one who suggested dance for him. And that has been a very, very transformative experience for him. He decided to do his Arangetram in India and did it in 2020. So that's when we found out about Dr. Ambika Kameshwar, who was the chief guest at his Arangetram. And then he started doing theater arts for holistic development in 2020. So that's a journey, what we call a journey to Bharat through Natya, because that's what pulled us towards India. And he's very happy, engaged in many experiences with TAHD. He's also doing coding with hashtag code and also doing his bachelor's of business administration. So academics do come in at the right time, at the right place. But the one thing we realized was that for him, just sitting and reading and just sitting and doing desk work for hours is not something that works. He still needs a lot of movement. He still needs a lot of art experiences. And we need to really have that flow for things to work for him. So that's our journey. I made a quick summary of things we learned from different things. So here we really learned to focus more on non-verbal communication. And I wanted to mention this because a lot of parents are very worried about speech and language. And one of the things we learned was that autistic individuals also have a lot of non-verbal communication challenges. So we started focusing on that. And then with Enki, that was the first place we made a connection between theater tools, storytelling, form drawing, and so many art experiences that Waldorf has, and how that can be used to enhance academic learning. So it was really having arts and movement throughout the day. So when I saw the Rasa program and I saw the theater arts program, I could immediately make the connection that why is it that the Rasa experience was something for Anand to pursue. Then MNRA, of course, was our key point where we started looking more at movement. And I cannot say enough about Bharatanatyam. It's the most transformative experience. And the words I would use is sustained, consistent movement. And it did wonders. So a lot of things changed after Anand did Bharatanatyam, including visual tracking, working memory, you name it. And I think Bharatanatyam did make an impact on that. So fortunately, he's still continuing that. And the final stop, so to speak, which is the Theatre Arts for Holistic Development. There are two sides to this, which is the Theatre Arts for Holistic Development, which is a framework for application of theatre arts based on Indian Natya. And there is certification for professionals and for parents, and I'm doing that. But Anant is also part of RASA, the Ramana Nritya Alaya, which is the organization that offers several programs for adults with autism. So the really encouraging thing about TAHD and RASA was it was not just a school level program, which is what Waldorf and Enki were. There seemed to be a game plan for keeping people engaged beyond that as they became adults, and it could really be a lifelong process. So we are very happy to be part of TAHD and RASA. So this brings me to LifeSmart parenting. LifeSmart actually took shape from my years of homeschooling. So we were bombarded with information. There was, all the usual stuff about RDI and MNRI, and everybody had hundreds of objectives. And then we started homeschooling, and that had a lot of objectives as well. So it was really hard to stay on track. And net result is both the parent and child can get stressed. And this is something that's not really addressed anywhere. And when we did RDI, we were actually fortunate that guided participation with the parent was at least addressed. But the managing the parent stress and child stress was not addressed. And as we have gone on a journey, we have realized that this is a critical piece. So we are seeing in the US, we are seeing in many places that there's a lot of conversation on stress and how to address that. But I haven't seen that as much in the Indian groups yet. And nor have I seen discussion of guided participation. I'm still hearing more about things like speech and occupational therapy and ABA. And so I would just like to offer these 6 goals to consider. So it doesn't matter whether you want to teach, somebody in the 5th standard or 10th standard or whatever it is. These are sort of the global goals that I had when Anant was young, and I still have them to this day. So that's something that I just wanted to share with the group. The other point I wanted to share is our mental models matter. So we are always thinking in terms of, this big thing about what all we have to teach the child. There are a lot of challenges, there are a lot of gaps. So we are really frantically trying to teach skills. And in fact, I tell everybody that, maybe 20 years back, I was lucky I didn't know very much, and maybe in the situation, ignorance was bliss. So because we didn't know much, we were just, playing and doing all the things that parents do with their children. But now when I see all the posts in different groups, even parents of very young children are really frantically running around trying to address different skills. Yes, early intervention is necessary, but if you're constantly pushing the child, guess what's going to happen? Stress. And then we hear about all the behavior problems and all the things that we need. Now we have to do more things to fix those behavior problems. So one of the things I would also put on the table is, yes, consider academic learning, but do please consider stress. Are you teaching your child in a way that you're not stressing them? They already have enough challenges. Their motor systems don't function right. They don't sleep properly. They have a lot of challenges. So are you having a gentle, nurturing approach to whatever you're teaching? Or are you trying to push them beyond their capacity? So that's a question that I'd like to, uh, you know, every parent to consider, whether their child is young or older. So this is something I wanted to share from my years of teaching. In my early years of teaching, one of the thought that really struck for me, which I read, was the teacher is the chief learner in the classroom. So another thought to offer to parents, if you want to facilitate academic learning, I think you have to learn a lot. So I started learning, and I think I can do 6 dissertations based on what I've learned and more. So really, it's a continual process of learning if you want to support neurodivergent children, because there's really not much support for them in schools. People think that, oh, you're in the US, so everything must have been fine. But that's not the case. So we had to study as much, and we really found that homeschooling was a better fit for him. And uh, it actually proved to be a very good decision, because I learned a lot about how Anant learns. I learned a lot about his interests and so on. And now we are able to move forward better because of the homeschooling. Now, now comes the sort of the, um, and I'll go back to the screen in a minute. So if there are any questions at this moment, quick questions, and then I know there are questions at the end.
Ma'am, what is the 100 project, ma'am, you had
Okay.
mentioned?
Okay. So I'm just coming to that 100-day project. So there's a lot of conceptual things in LifeSmart, but there is only one core practice, and that is the 100-day project. So if you're in one of the LifeSmart groups, you will hear a lot of discussion of 100-day projects. The reason that came to be was because it was very, very difficult to stay on track. You're bombarded by information all the time. And now when I see the groups, I think it's probably become 100 times more than what we experienced. So it was really difficult to be consistent and stay on track with anything. The 100-day approach is basically what I call a very simple approach, what I call 1-10-100. So whatever you want to focus on, make a small commitment. I'm going to commit at least 10 minutes to something for the next 100 days and see where that goes. So for example, right now we have about 8 or 10 100-day projects running. So we have one on dance, which is a really critical piece of the day for him. But instead of just doing something, we want to do it in a more mindful way and focus on specific skills and so forth. So we have a 100-day project. We do that in a very methodical and mindful way. Same with reading. Some days we do it, some days we don't do it. Again, we have made that into a 100-day project. It's a good tracking tool. It's also something that gives consistency. And I really think it has helped a lot in terms of being consistent, being on track, being taking small steps, not getting overwhelmed, and slowly moving forward. One other key point about the 100-day project that I tell people is it's about discovering the doable. You keep hearing all these different things, and nobody can possibly do all the different things that you're told. So really, we have to ground ourselves in our reality. And that's what I would tell every parent. Whatever works for you and for your child, that's where you start. That's the only place you can start. So from there, you see what are the next best steps you can take. So that's the sort of the background of the 100-day project. And I tell people that if I were homeschooling again today, I would do everything as a 100-day project. And in fact, we are running everything as a 100-day project now, but that's what I would have done with 2020 hindsight. So I see 100-day projects as our core practice. That's the one thing that we do that brings all the different pieces together. And why do I find it necessary is consistency is one, sustained effort is another, because we are keeping on being pulled in all these different directions. And we need something to say, okay, at least there is this small thing I'm going to do. So some of the parents in my group have started doing that, and they've completed some projects. And it also forces you to prioritize. So you think about, okay, am I going to do academic learning right now, and my child doesn't even co-regulate with me, has so many movement issues. So it forces you to think about priorities and say, okay, I need to have more movement in the day. I need to really work on guided participation with my child. So as we have these conversations, people are also figuring out which 100-day projects are worth doing. And so you're always having this question of what is worth doing and doable right now. And then you do a small project, committing some time, and I encourage everyone to share in the group, because if you share, then you can also build on what everyone is doing. So that's the 100-day project idea, which is really becoming the core practice of LifeSmart. We have a lot of elements, but that's the sort of the centerpiece of LifeSmart. Okay. I'm not going through all the slides, but I just want to go through some main ones. The other thing that has really worked with the parents in my group is what I call the 7 tips. So the first one is be mindful of movement. And I find this very useful because a lot of the parents, especially in India, are very worried about sitting tolerance. And my point is, if your child has so many sensory motor issues and can't sit still and is running around, it's really hard to build sitting tolerance. So can you just do movement activities, and how can you learn with movement? So that's a question I always pose. The second one, which we have started talking about more now, is using theater. So I had whatever you're trying to teach. So for example, right now we are working on reading. We are trying to prioritize that. And when you think about anything, whether it's reading or whatever topics, on Enki, actually, they used to do that. We used to have stories and verses for any subject. I still remember the verses that we used for learning the basic arithmetic operators. So everything was done through verse and storytelling and drawing and so forth. So if you just think a little bit about the theater arts tools, and some of the main tools are storytelling, drama, movement, music, you'll actually find that there are a lot of concepts that you can teach using those tools. So that's the second tip there on that list. So those 7 tips are sort of my distillation of whatever I have learned over the last, I don't know, 20 plus years, what works and what has been very important for us. And I do find that it helps parents, because somebody will come, 1 year later and said, it's really helpful. You keep talking about movement. And now I've really started paying more attention to it, and we do more of movement now. So that's the other piece of, what we have created for parents. So if you see, that's a typical day, and you'll see that dance and the traditional academic type activities are woven together, because that's the only format that seems to work for him. I also had a slide on the different kinds of movement. So you could have just, movement doesn't always have to be, swimming or karate or something very structured. It could just even be doing chores together. So when we started doing RDI, we ended up doing a lot of chores together just to coordinate and co-regulate. So that can bring movement too. So if you start thinking about the different ways of incorporating movement throughout the day, those are the kind of things I would encourage parents to think about before they start tackling academic learning. And there's a lot of discussion now. This, for example, Bruce Perry's model, which talks about the 3 R's being regulation, relationships, and reasoning. So we always think in terms of reading, writing, arithmetic, but maybe we need to think a little bit in terms of regulation, relationships, and reasoning. So that's the idea, that before hitting academic learning, think about all the things that you can do to facilitate academic learning. So I'll actually go back to one of the slides. So this, I think, for anyone thinking about academic learning, I think this slide is really the key, and especially number 3, which is evolving guided participation. And again, I don't hear too much discussion of it in the Indian groups, but when we did relationship development intervention, Dr. Gutstein was very particular about dynamic thinking and guided participation. And he used to talk about why guided participation that we take for granted gets disrupted for neurodivergent children, because they're not really able to tune in. They have sensory, they may be blocking off inputs, and so many reasons why parent and child may not be co-regulating. So if the parent and child are not co-regulating, it's very hard for this child to now go to school and learn from teachers or interact with peers. In fact, that was one of the reasons I decided to homeschool, because Dr. Gutstein said, no point worrying about peer interactions when the child doesn't even really co-regulate with the parent first, right? So we spent, in kindergarten, first grade, and so on, we used to do a lot of games, all of them about co-regulation, doing things together, a lot of non-verbal communication. And once you have that guided participation, I honestly believe that's what has set the stage for Anant to learn from a lot of different people. So he's been incredibly blessed. He had, senior faculty from Kalakshetra as his guru for Bharatanatyam. He's learning from many wonderful teachers in Rasa. But to be able to do all that, we need to be able to participate in a guided participation relationship. So if you are running away, you can't, interact with anyone, then it's very hard to do any of those things, even if people are willing to work with you. So that is something that I would really suggest people consider in terms of, academic learning. So I'll actually pause here in case there are any questions, and then continue on with a few things. Just any quick questions.
Ma'am, so when you did RDI, ma'am, so in USA back then, was it Dr. Stephen Gutstein, ma'am?
No, actually, I did with Miss Joyce Albu, who was trained with. I had attended some sessions by Dr. Gutstein, but that's who was our consultant, Dr. Joyce Albu.
Okay, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
And ma'am, can you just show that triangle once more, ma'am?
Okay, will do.
Thank you, ma'am. And not this one. I think the tetra something.
Yeah, the tetrahedral, sure. So, okay, let me actually spend a few minutes talking about it. So for me, as far as I'm concerned, as I said, the 100-day project is sort of the base. When you fold it over, I didn't do that, but if you fold it over into a 3-dimensional thing, you'll actually have this as the base. So for us right now, that is the base. Everything we do goes through 100-day projects. And there are two sides. One is the daily life, the ongoing flow of activities, and that's driven by your daily learning, your interests, your family interactions, and engagement with community. And then you may have smart projects, right? For example, Anand participated in a few plays. He had exams. So there is the ongoing flow of daily activities, and there are smart projects. And the third piece here is something I added due to RDI, which is continuous explorations. A lot of our children really resist novelty. They do not like change. So a good piece of our work was introducing novelty in a very structured way. Dr. Gutstein now uses the term just noticeable differences. So we would have a lot of regulatory patterns and do simple changes to make those explorations happen. So we still have that kind of an approach. And at the center is your 100-day project. And these are what I think are very important for parents, what I call the 6 C's. We're all, being connected, conversations. I can't tell you how incredibly important those conversations are. I think I survived my homeschooling days because of those conversations. I had a neighbor who was homeschooling 4 children, and she was just a treasure house of resources. So if I went to her, she would just quickly say, okay, you can try this, this, and this. And it was, and incredibly important to be able to do that. So that's why I also encourage parents to share, because if they share, then other people know where you are and what you need, and we can jump in with the right, suggestions and resources. So, so that's part of the parent preparing for um, the role is, if you have conversations, you can clarify what needs to be done and when, make better choices, develop the right skills, and coordinate everything to get things done. So that is sort of my overall perspective of parenting, that we need on the sort of the big picture end, the 6 C's. And the 6 C's, the right connections, conversations, and it's not just information. So that's something that sort of concerns me, because now I see there's just so much information flowing in so many you know different ways. But are we really looking at how to help people make better choices? So actually the 6 C's came because of my professional work. I used to work for an organization called the PhD Project, and they're an organization in the US that try to um, you know diversify the workforce by encouraging minority students to apply for PhDs in business. And so that was their model, because they had a tremendous model for bringing people together and really asking them, getting them thinking about what the possibilities are, why do a PhD, why not do a PhD, and so on. So that same thing, do we really do the conversations with an intent to clarify and an intent to make the right choices? So for example, if you want to do, go to Rasa and do a theater arts program, you have a bunch of questions. Is this right for me? My son may be doing it, but it may or may not be right for your child, right? So how do we have those conversations so people can make the right choices? So that's a overall way of thinking that I developed from the PhD project. And at the center is those small, you know 10 minutes per day commitment. So you have this big thinking, you have a lot of ideas, you're learning how to filter and make the right choices, and then bring it into very focused practice with the 100-day project. So all of these have to be in balance, because you may be doing the 100-day projects, but you may be doing the wrong 100-day projects, right? So unless you have a good system for getting the right information at the right time, and then taking it into focused action, that's what it really takes for parents. And it's a lot, because there's no other way. The systems don't really support our children very well, so we end up having to play this kind of a role.
Ma'am, can I ask a quick question, ma'am?
Sure.
So you spoke about using theater and arts for teaching children. So how does it work for children with less speech or almost no speech?
Okay. Now, in fact, I would think that theater gives great opportunities for those with less speech as well. Because if you think about theater, it's a lot of use of the body, right? So when they teach, and it's been very interesting to watch. Anant has now been through 3 plays with Rasa, so I really go with him many times and watch the process. It really doesn't matter to what extent you're able to speak, because a lot of their plays are, they have music and they have dialogues, and they model the gestures, and that's how the children learn those gestures and do the play, right? So if you think about Indian theater, they have the 4 forms of abhinaya, which is your vachika, which is your speech, right? Angika, which is your body, and satvika, which is your expression, and aharya, which is your costumes and props and settings and so on. I think we tend to get too focused on speech, right? How do I make my child speak? How do I make my child speak, right? But theater opens up opportunities to use all these other things. You can move, you can do things together, you can use facial expressions, which is a big thing. A lot of our children don't communicate enough with facial expressions. It's a big area to work on, right? And all of this can be brought to theater. So I think there's greater awareness of use of visual tools such as PECs, and you hear a lot about alternative forms of communication, PECs, and so on. But really our first tool is the body, right? How do you interact with a baby, right? We're grandparents now. I have a 1 year of grandson, right? And when he was a baby, he doesn't speak, right? But have you seen how much interaction goes on with the baby without language? So I think we just make this assumption that communication equals speech. And Dr. Gutstein always used to warn us that some of the worst outcomes were for those who had a lot of speech. Because they had a lot of speech, people didn't realize they had problems, right? But they're not able to track anything, they're not able to follow nonverbal cues, and those sometimes have the worst outcomes. So he used to say that, and he used to really emphasize nonverbal communication. So if you just stop to think about how, and so that's why actually when I did the first presentation, I called it parenting as theater, because we are quite dramatic when we interact with young babies and children, right? So consider theater, consider visual tools, and it's a part of a mix that you can use to enhance communication. So whatever problems you're having, I think the more you equip them with different kinds of communication tools, you're going to be in a better position with your child over time. So I think THD, I actually think opens up more avenues for communication. I don't
Thank
know
you,
if
ma'am.
that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Ma'am, I have a question.
Okay.
My son is 7 years old and he has a problem with the sound R. So, for example, if he wants to say road, he says bit of like load. And
Mhm.
I try to correct him, but I'm not successful. So, should I take him to a speech therapy? Do you have any suggestions for that?
Okay. So your question is about specific sound, right? So
Yes,
again,
yes.
I would again answer it more generally rather than that one issue. Because again, if you take something like TAHD, you can actually bring in a lot of language in a fun way, right? So especially for parents, you can't just do drills. The speech therapist may be doing it a certain way, but you can't sit at home all day long and just do speech therapy, right? But if you do storytelling and if you do movement and you do drama and you do all these things, you can build many more opportunities for communication with your child. So I think that's sort of the broader answer in terms of just trying out different sounds or whatever the specific issue is. I think it's all about creating the experiences and creating them in a fun way. So one of the things in TAHD that really sort of struck me was what they call the 4 E's, which is your exploration, experience, and then the expression and enjoyment. So that's a word that really caught my eye because we are generally running around. I've not heard a single therapist ever in my life use the word enjoyment, right? So if you do things, you create a lot of different kinds of experiences, you do stories, you just play with that sounds in different ways throughout the day. I think that's going to complement whatever is formally being taught in speech therapy, and you're probably going to see some, success eventually. So that's kind of the thinking I would suggest. And we were fortunate, because we did Enki Waldorf, we were already sort of living in this kind of a, mode for several years. Any other questions?
Yes.
What's your plan for his independent living?
Independent living. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, that's a good question. I mean, it's the way I think about it. I don't think anybody is completely independent. We're all, to some extent, lesser or greater extent, we're all dependent on someone. So I think it's just a assumption that we're going to be completely independent. So I think the way I see it is, it's a question of degrees. You do things to make the child more and more independent. And for me, actually, it goes back, and that's maybe just our personal situation. It tends to go back to stress and emotional regulation, because that's where I think the biggest struggles for my son are. I mean, we have managed to tackle a lot of the other things, But especially as they grow older, they're probably beginning to recognize, that things don't quite work for them as they do for other people. They're beginning to be more aware of the, environment. They're beginning to be aware that it's much harder for them to get things done. So I think the stress has gone up, especially after COVID, and I've heard other people say the same. So for me, I think my big R would be resilience, teaching them, uh, you know, teaching them, teaching them the, you know, how to manage stress and how to live a life. The second part of independence for me is daily routine. That's very important. The reason I say that is, I think about this. Let us say after us, the child is somewhere. We find some place for this young adult to be supported a little bit. But who's going to spend all day long managing his day, right? So I feel like he needs to be able to occupy himself, right? Do something and keep himself occupied through the day. So now he's very aware. He knows that he can't just do, academic stuff all day long. He needs a mix of movement and so on. So for example, when we are in London and we have the young baby and I can't go out sometimes, he'll say, okay, I'm off for a walk. He knows he needs his morning walk. And I was in the hospital for 5 days with COVID, some time ago. And I was very happy that he managed. He managed beautifully. He took his exams and he was able to do that because he had that routine. He could keep himself going throughout the day. So when we think of independence, there are just so many layers to what is independence. And I think we just have to look at different, elements of it and work on it. And again, I think theater actually can be a very good approach for teaching life skills. So in fact, they call it that. They call it the life skills program because you can do role plays, you can teach life skills, and you have to be quite explicit with our children because they often don't have the kinds of experiences other kids do. They go to school, they're out with many kids, and they pick up a lot of things you don't even know what they're picking up, right? But for our kids, a lot of those avenues are not there. So once you invest in theater arts and you try storytelling and all these different tools, you will actually find ways to teach almost anything that you want to. So I think I'm a big believer in TAHD. And TAHD is, for me, is not really new, because I've sort of been on that path for a long time, but it's given a much more structured framework. And we also have much more of an ecosystem. That is the biggest thing which we have now, because he has, professionals he's learning from, he's in plays, and all of these other things. So I think for whatever goals you have in mind, whether it's life skills, whether it's specific academics, the suggestion I would give to you is think theater. Take a look at the 5 tools: movement. Even to this day, it could be dance, but it could also just be, we do a lot of the reviews on our morning walk. It's I used to do that too. I remember walking around with my book trying to learn history back in the day, right? So once you start thinking in terms of movement and dance, music and rhythm, storytelling, drama, and arts and crafts, what mix works for each child or adult will be different. But I think those give you quite a few openings to explore in a calm way. It's really stress reducing, right? When you do the arts, it's really reduces stress, and it's something I think worth thinking about. I think there was a question about storytelling or
Yes, ma'am. How to develop interest for children in storytelling as well as reading from Mrs. Shilpa.
okay. So now the two separate questions, and I'll take them, separately. One is storytelling. I think storytelling, we tend to, do it even from very small babies, right? So I think we may have some challenges because our children may not pay attention, right? So when you combine with movement, that's again where movement comes in. In Enki, we had a lot of simple verses, right? So when you combine narrative with movement, that can help. You can combine it with arts. So you're doing some craft and you're narrating a story as you do that. So there are a lot of different ways. Again, if you go back and look at the theater arts tools, along with that, I would also add visual tools. So we used to use something called Think Blocks, and that was the one I had the certification in with the critical thinking and so on. So if you have the think blocks, we would actually label the characters or label the settings, and we would use a lot of visual tools as well. So I think it's going to be dependent on each child, and there's nothing to do but to experiment. Some of them will respond to movement, some of them might respond to more music, some might want more arts and crafts. So I think you just have to experiment and see what works. The one thing that certainly did not work for Anant was a lot of reading. And so that's another point I want to make.
Ma'am,
A
we are
senior,
not,
come again? Was there a
and we are
question?
not able to hear you, ma'am. It's buffering sometimes.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So what I was trying to tell is reading, there can be a lot of tricky issues. So for Anant, it was visual tracking. He had a lot of problems with a lot of motor problems, including visual tracking. And one of the senior Waldorf teachers said, so what if he's having trouble reading? If he's having trouble reading, doesn't mean he can't learn. So he can really engage ideas at a pretty high level, but he cannot read. So that's has been my approach. Things will develop when they develop. And we used to do a lot of storytelling and learn in different ways. So that would be my suggestion. Think about how you can address different skills, and you have to be creative. It depends on each child. So in Anand's case, he's quite verbal, but he had immense eye tracking problems. Somebody else may have a different combination of challenges. So that's why the parent role becomes absolutely critical. So, nobody else is going to know your child as well as you do. So you have to be there. You have to be the one doing the experiment. And when the right teachers show up, you have to make things happen for your child, because there's no way somebody who sees your child, once or twice a week for an hour is going to know all that So, one very important idea that I want to leave people with, and I think Praveen Kumar and Autism Parents have always says this: become an expert in your child. And the best therapists actually will say that. They'll say, I may be an expert in child development, but you are the expert in your child. So that's kind of the model to look at. And we've been very fortunate with Rasa. I'm very actively engaged. As the child grows older, hopefully they can advocate a little bit for themselves as well. But I think for the best outcomes in any kind of educational setting, or because I know that there were some questions about inclusion and so on, regardless of what particular setups you're looking at, there's really no substitute for parents being involved. So that brings me right back to RDI. I think the biggest thing we get from RDI was to say, stop, forget the academics, forget everything else. First, learn how to be a better guide to your child. So that's really where we go back.
Yes. Ma'am, we have one more question from Ms. Saujanya Bharadwaj, which says how to improve social skills in homeschooled children, how to initiate and, develop social skills in homeschooled children.
Okay. So again, I would go back to the same point that Dr. Gutstein used to make. He used to say, don't worry about homeschooling. If your child cannot co-regulate with you, there is no way he's ready for peer interactions, right? So the first thing, we again come back to RDI, which was the co-regulation, the guided participation with the child. We used to spend an enormous amount of time playing all kinds of little games and use a lot of nonverbal communication. And if you are interested, there's a lot of even publicly available information on RDI now, and there are other resources. But I think the first thing is to get the parent-child relationship back on track. And you may not realize that the parent-child relationship is not on track. That's the other part of it, because we get so trapped into, oh, let's rush around, take the child from this therapy to that. And we are well-meaning, but if you're rushing from therapy to therapy, you don't have time to really relax. And even when your child is home, they're probably very stressed from 6 hours at school that didn't work for him. And he's not in a mood to play with you either, right? So, uh, so I think uh, it's really important to build those foundations, and then the rest will fall in place. So I think it's very, very important to go back and reclaim that, to go back and invest in co-regulation with the child, and recognize that parent-child interactions are disrupted. So we actually used to work also with a brilliant therapist. They used to run something called a family immersion model. And their whole point was we are always thinking in terms of fixing the child. But if you really think about it, the interactions between parents and children are very disrupted because the child is not, it's not the parent's fault. He always used to tell us it's not because you are doing anything wrong. It's because the child is not giving the same kind of signals a neurotypical child would. And so you don't have the feedback to go on. So really getting that parent-child communication back on track itself is probably the first thing I would do. So I'm very happy about this. I mean, we have not optimized uh, absolutely first connect and then correct. So that's absolutely it. But the point is sometimes it's very hard to know how to do that connect. And therapies like RDI, and I'm sure there are others. I'm just familiar with RDI, so that's the one I bring up. But I think that's the most important. And it was tough, right? We are three academics in this family, and Anant's the only one on his own path. But I'm really glad we really stepped back and went on that route. So I think it's been overall healthy. He's had, as I said, excellent teachers, an excellent piano teacher. He's had a lot of, he's not necessarily had the same kind of peer relationships other children might have, but he's had a pretty rich set of experiences. And, we just move forward from here. So I saw 2, 3 questions. So let me see.
Yeah, that is like they want to know if you are trained in RDA, ma'am, and if RDA is the foundation for LifeSmart.
Okay. So no, I'm not an RDI. The only thing I've been moved to train in is TAHD, even though I'm not an artist, and the last thing I know is music and dance. But that's the only thing that sort of motivated me. Okay, I'm going to go and get trained in this. But I'm not trained in RDI, but I have supported parents because there is that early stage, right? I mean, it's a lot of money. It's a big investment. So what I have helped parents with, I know enough to help parents to do a 100-day project. So there have been people in my group who have tried 100 days of co-regulation. I've given them tips. Others in my group have also done RDI and they've given them tips. So we can certainly support people in doing little exploration, because you can listen all you want to RDI, but that never convinces you, right? Whether it's good or not. And I think Shinjita, are you still there? I don't know if she's there or, okay. Anyway, some of the people have tried RDI and some will decide they're going to go forth and do it more formally. Some will decide I've learned enough, I can just use some of these ideas on my own. Yes, it is one of the foundations of LifeSmart, but not the only one. So it's certainly the base in the sense that I do think guided participation is very important, and investing in guided participation is really, that's where things start.
So, ma'am, we have one more question from Mr. Rajagopal. He says, ma'am, our son has poor name call response. He's throwing things, not touching food items like sambar, chutney, hitting others. We don't know what to do.
So again, uh, all those behaviors, at least my perspective is, you have to always think about why those behaviors are happening. And a lot of times, they're not able to communicate. So that's really the only way they're able to express, right? If he's not wanting to, say, touch certain things, that may be sensory issues, right? He probably doesn't like the texture, right? And then if you push them into doing something they don't want to do and are not ready to do, guess what? You're getting behavior problems, right? So I think you really have to, step back and think why those things are happening. Is he being stressed? Are there a lot of therapies? Is he having a comfortable day? Are there certain triggers? Is he doing these kind of behaviors at certain times? So it's not easy, but it really has to, you have to pay attention to why those things are happening and what you can work on and what you cannot work on. So if he's really resisting certain textures and certain foods, I would say, let it be. I mean, if he's not ready to eat it, if he doesn't want to handle it, you can't really force him to do that. And maybe do something like occupational therapy and find ways to work on that. So it's really a question of trying to understand what is triggering behaviors And a lot of times it is changing our, um, our way of interacting and our expectations more than anything you can do to them. I don't
Yes,
know if that answers the
ma'am.
question.
We have Divya Verma here. She she wants to ask something, I suppose. Divya, are you there?
Yeah, I think she's.
Yeah, hello, ma'am.
Hello, Divya.
So, ma'am, do we really need to take training for this co-regulation and guided participation, or you can help us with that? Because I think by reading
Um,
alone, you cannot make sense out of it.
you cannot see. Here's at least what I'm trying to do. I mean, I'm not an RDI. I can't claim to be an RDI trainer or something like that. But certainly, I think I've been able to help parents at least get started on this and try it out. Some people have said, okay, we're going further with it and gone for training, and some have said no, right? You can also, I also feel that you can use a combination of, there's a lot of material available publicly now about RDI, but the trouble is you won't know where to go and where to start. So if you're in my group in LifeSmart, I often will help you, get started. And not just me, there are other parents who will also help you, right? So you at least have a starting point. I also give little activity suggestions and things you can do. So that's enough to, I think, get you started and, try something for a few months and then see where that takes you. And then you could actually take that foundation and combine with some of the TAHD tools, and you may find that you don't even need RDI. It all depends. I mean, in our situation at that time, there was not much available. So we really did have to go the whole RDI training route. But now there's so much out there, you may be able to take these bits and pieces and, create for yourself from that.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Ma'am, how do we get enrolled to your smart group, ma'am?
So just, you can look for LifeSmart Parenting on Facebook. So that's really, we have a WhatsApp group too, but I'm finding it really hard to, handle the back and forth, and it's very disorganized. So I've decided to just be on Facebook, because there at least you can organize the threads, and if somebody has a question, you can refer them back to the thread. Whereas in WhatsApp, everything just sort of flows and it's very difficult. So right now, LifeSmart Parenting is the main group. I also suggest sending me an email to lifesmartlabs@gmail.com. So one thing I've started doing is sending, because there's a lot of volume of information on the Facebook group. So I'm sending selected information to my mailing list, just the key things that we're discussing each week, and a newsletter, ebooks, things like that. I'm sending via the email list as well. So that's lifesmartlabs@gmail.com.
Ma'am, we have one more question. Can you please give us examples of using TAHD while storytelling for a non-verbal kid with no imitation skills and also poor eye contact and hyperactivity?
Yeah, so that's a lot of different things right there. But I think I would take, again, come to the doable, right? So to me, it's interesting that imitation was mentioned. So we actually just did a session last week on imitation, because the basic process we use in TAHD is what I call imitate, repeat, memorize, and improvise. And that's a place where I might start, because if your child can't imitate, and that's probably got a lot to do with the motor system, right? If you can't imitate, then it becomes very difficult to actually engage the body, right? So in this case, probably I'll do simple imitation things. In fact, we did a 100-day THD lab. We just finished one round, and that was the same idea there, is to give people little, we actually have little things from Bharatanatyam and other things. So even though it's Bharatanatyam, it's just, very structured imitation, right? So we have these 5-minute clips. So one of the parents in my group, so Anant has been doing, Bharatanatyam for 10 years. He can imitate fairly quickly now, right? So I was very encouraged to find that a parent of a young child, a 6-year-old, was actually able to take the video and really simplify it, took a small slice of it and practiced imitation. So once she tried that, she liked what was happening, and she signed her son up with Rasa for Bharatanatyam classes. So I think, you have to do some experimentation, and then you might start seeing the path. So I would encourage you to actually join the group, because it's ongoing. We meet every Wednesday, and in our Wednesday sessions, we actually focus on some small, when very specific topics. Like last week, we discussed imitate, repeat, memorize, improvise. That's what we discussed. So I think this was sort of a broad one because it's a new group, and I just wanted to give sort of a, quick overview of all the things that we address. So it's quite a lot of different topics, but I think for a new group, that was sort of something to at least frame in what we are about. But I think once, if you're in the LifeSmart group, we have ended up at a place of weekly meetings where we're talking about very specific topics, and we also can support you a little bit in things like RDI and THD. THD, I can definitely support you. I'm uh, really doing it primarily to support parents. That's my primary objective for pursuing certification in that. So THD, I can definitely support once you're in the group. RDI, I think I know enough to get people started. And homeschooling, of course, we've been down this path for many years. So definitely can help there as well. Of course, we did it in the US, but still the basic how to get people working on different skills is something I can give some help with.
Ma'am, we have few questions from our parents as well. So I'll just move on to that. This is from Mr. Dhanashekaran, father of Sham. He says, Sham had speech delay even at age of 10. He wants belts 7 to 10 per day, tearing it into 3 pieces and plastering the middle portion with sellotape. Doesn't brush teeth, doesn't follow hygiene, no haircut, no nail cutting, no food restrictions. So what to do?
So again, I think that's a pretty large set of issues. And if you break it down, I think it definitely looks like there are some OT issues, occupational therapy issues involved here. Globally, I think how, the connect before you correct type of thing, how do you interact with your child? I think that's an investment every parent should make, because whether it's brushing your teeth or learning calculus, it doesn't matter. If you're going to have to support your child, you need to be able to bond with your child and interact with your child. So that's definitely a path to explore. And the speech, that's entirely another issue. A lot of our children have language and speech issues, not something that you can resolve overnight. So again, you may need speech therapy, but again, explore something like THD to create a language rich environment in your house, and introducing language in a fun way. So that's if you want more specifics, I think it'll be good if you're in the group, because this is you know too broad to really tackle at once, and I think you'll have to probably break it up and you know look at different pieces.
We have one more question, ma'am. This is from Mr. Govind, father of Arulmoni Varman. My son, aged 7, is nonverbal ASD. How best to capture his needs or wants? He points, but sometimes he's very quiet. He looks upset when he gets upset. That is one question he's asked. He's asked another question also, which says, as child ages, how best to prepare him to interact with other children? He is in an inclusive school.
Okay, so the first one, since he's saying he points, it looks like he's already using you know the body for communication. So certainly the theater arts, once you start using it, I think it's going to open up avenues. If you consider all the 5 theater tools, it's definitely going to open up avenues for communication. Combine that with the usual visual things like PECs or alternative communication. I think investing in communication systems is very important. And when Anant was growing up, I had never heard of PECs, but luckily I had done work with think blocks and other things which helped me bring visual thinking. So visual thinking has always been part of our life. Anant also liked to fold these paper plates. That's where all our tetrahedron all come from. So since he used to fold all these paper plates, I used to write on them as well, right? So visual thinking and also the THD tools would be the 2 things. And I think that probably addresses both your, both your questions, because if you look at inclusion also, whatever it is, you have to give pathways for communication, right? So if they're not able to talk like us, then you have to open up pathways. And an example is, my grandson came to visit. So even though my son will not engage in the typical ways we do, because he's learning all these songs and so on, he learned some, children's songs, and he enjoyed his time with his nephew. So I'm realizing that, we're just barely touching the tip of the iceberg, that TAHD actually opens up so many possibilities for interactions. And, hopefully as we go further, I've just finished level 1. So, hopefully as we go further, we're going to see more and more of this.
Ma'am, Miss Monica has asked, how can we start with TAHD?
Okay. So there are actually two parts to this. One is, Monica, where are you from? Which state?
Ma'am, Bangalore.
Bangalore. Okay.
And ma'am, honestly, ma'am, one of our friends, Priya, who is also in Bangalore, she
Uh-huh.
just sent this across about this webinar. And amazing, ma'am, the way you have put it across, it's really nice, ma'am. We are both in the RDI program ourselves, so we could really connect, ma'am, to whatever you are saying. It's
Thank you.
lovely, ma'am.
Thank you. So if you're in Bangalore or Chennai, there
Yeah.
is Rasa is there in both
Uh-huh.
places.
Okay,
But
ma'am.
it also depends on how old your child is. How old is your child?
Ma'am, 10 years old, ma'am.
10 years old.
Mhm.
So there is a Rasa in Bangalore, but I
Right.
think maybe 10 years, maybe a little bit younger. So
Uh-huh.
here's what I would encourage. Actually, they're just going to start the THD training. And, one of the things I worked with Rasa, I said, look, my son is older. I can take exams, but everybody cannot take exams. So that was their format. They have a certification by Bridge Academy, and that certification is the usual. You have to do all the coursework and take exams and so forth. And I said, that's not going to work for parents. It's really hard for them
That's
to,
right. Yeah.
prepare for exams and while taking care of their child all the time and so on. So they started a parent version where you can just submit portfolios. This time they also have self-study. So it's really on a self-study basis, and you do a portfolio. And that's the route I myself am taking, because I've had enough of exams. Uh, you know a portfolio is more meaningful for me, so I myself am on that route. I'm not going for Bridge Academy certification. So that's something to consider. You can go for THD certification, which I think is good because it gives you a big picture. They also apparently support you for doing lesson plans, and I do want to work with them in terms of curriculum development and some of that. So there are a few different pieces in play, but I think the best thing might be to contact Rasa and see what you can do. So some of the parents in my group have signed up their child for Bharatanatyam. And
Right.
I'm a big believer in Bharatanatyam because I think it's such a structured form of movement. Anant tried hip hop and tap before it, but that's not something, when imitation skills are poor, hip hop and tap are too, unstructured for him to learn. So he didn't thrive as much on it. Bharatanatyam has worked so much better. So, you know, that's a possibility too. So they have online classes where they could do storytelling. Anant actually started with an online class. You can consider Bharatanatyam. If you personally ask me, I would say movement. They might say storytelling, whatever. But
Right.
just my own life, just what has really worked for Anant, what has been a game changer has been movement. So if you ask me, I would say explore Bharatanatyam. Even there, we have some support for you, because if you're in our group, we have a lot of Anant and his guru have done a lot of little clips that they did because of the 100-day project. So you can definitely try those as a starting point, and then find your way to, it takes a little time for them to do the assessment and assign a teacher and so on and so forth. But you could, also think in terms of which tools you want to invest in, whether you want to go for movement or storytelling first, or arts and crafts. So some children, I think, really gravitate towards arts and crafts, so that may be a route as well. But I think they're very flexible. I mean, for Anant, because he had already done his Bharatanatyam, they said, okay, he doesn't really need movement right now. Let's focus on storytelling. So I think they do the assessment and also see a full picture. And so they don't have really like it has to be this way. So they're pretty flexible with assigning people and figuring out what works for you. So online program is one option. And then, home program. Ask them if they can support you in building a home program.
Right.
And hopefully I can help, as I go through the
Right.
certification.
That's what, ma'am. Yeah, yeah. Because you would have the experience as a
Yes.
parent also. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. And the other thing is, I also have that RBI background. So
Right,
when
right.
I give when I give the THD suggestions, I'm already considering RBI. I'm saying that if you're doing a THD experience, for example, if you're doing Bharatanatyam,
Hmm.
you know, what are some do's and don'ts? Don't instruct your child, right? And we are fortunate. Anand's guru is excellent. I mean, he just uses so much non-verbal, but not everyone does that, right? Because everyone's got their own style. But if you know RBI, you have some, ideas on how to engage your child in this THD activities.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Thank you so much, ma'am. Will be in touch.
Ma'am, Miss
Ma'am,
Shilpa Prem and Divya Verma have questions. Miss Shilpa?
Hello,
Hello,
Shilpa.
ma'am.
Hello.
Ma'am, I just have a question. I mean, like, I see when I sit with my son for daily activity, like suppose if I take
I can't hear you, Shilpa.
hello, am I audible now? Hello,
Yeah. Yeah, now you're
Yeah.
audible.
ma'am. When I sit with my son for the daily activity, one activity was such like, I had given him a book, and then I was like, okay, turn to page number 6, turn to
Hmm.
page number 10, or something like that. What he does, like, what we usually do is from the front, we take page number 6. But my son was like from back he was taking, but it was correct. I understood that his methodology is something different.
Yeah, yeah.
So I went, okay, I was like okay with it. And then once I took him to the sea aquarium. So that's when, like when he was watching those fishes and all, I was just telling him, see how many fishes are there, see, see the color of the fish. I was like keeping on talking, and then he was like not paying no attention to me.
Yes.
And then
Hmm.
I stopped, and I just
Yes.
asked him, what are
Hmm.
you looking at? And then
Hmm.
he said, fish. What is a
Hmm.
fish doing? So what are you looking? What is a fish? What exactly is going on in your mind? So his views, his mind works in a different way. So I just want to check with you, what methodology can I choose to make my son better understand things? Because I understand that he doesn't work our way, he works in
Yes.
a different way. So
Hmm.
I understand he's a bit visual also, like he learns with
Yes.
a lot of actions. Like
Yes.
even the storytelling, of course he doesn't sit with me, if I take a book and I'm like ask him to read, no, it doesn't work at all for me. But
Hmm.
then now off late I've started, like, I don't take books, I don't take the stories which has already been narrated by some other authors. I'll be
Hmm.
like, daily routine, you take this, no, I mean, like, morning, what did you do? You went to school in the bike, and then
Hmm.
I dropped you, and then I don't know whether it is like reaching him, my methodology is correct. So is there any other methodology where I can connect with my son better? I
Okay.
just
So
want
I
to
think
check.
I think this is where I think once you have an understanding of co-regulation, and also going back to the stress issues, we realize that a lot of our children really resist performance demands. So I actually have a small handout that I share, with reduce the performance demands, use more non-verbal. So when you look at the child and use gestures, you're not putting them on the spot, right? And there is also this question on the how you communicate. So definitely, if you join the group, we can have extended conversations on this, because it's nothing that I can really resolve in a few minutes, but it's something that we do, you know regularly. So I
Sure.
had a couple of other questions. I think there was a question from Meera on dance,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
think I
She
think you start at any age. I really am a firm believer in movement, because I feel, especially as Anant has grown older, I think we have really run into stress issues, and I think that's still our, I call it playing shoots and ladders. Every other way we seem to be progressing well, but this is what keeps pulling us down. I think people are realizing that the movement based activities are helpful for you know regulating stress. So in fact, actually what is happening now is, because Anant is learning from a teacher in Ramana Maharishi Center for Learning, so he's actually taken a lot of interest in Ramana Maharishi teachings as well. So it's that combination of, for him, it's that combination of movement plus THD plus spiritual teachings. I think it's that combination that seems to be helping him, find a path forward. So it's going to be different for each person, but I think I do feel a big difference between regular Bharatanatyam and THT Bharatanatyam, because Anant has had 10 years of regular Bharatanatyam, and he had an excellent teacher. He's a senior teacher, senior guru, and senior professor in Kalakshetra, so can't get better than that. So he has an excellent teacher, but I think his need right now is more supported by THT. So we actually went that direction. I would definitely, encourage all of you to consider, if at all you're doing Bharatanatyam, to look for a teacher in THT. Look for a teacher in Rasa, because then you also have access to the ecosystem. So for adults, that's the huge thing that Anant has got. If you see the ebook down below, there's some pictures from the plays that you've been, and you've been to one. It's wonderful. Now he goes and attends a lot of their shows also. Now he also, because his dance teacher is from RMCL in Bangalore, so he goes to both places, and he goes and he knows all the artists in RMCL. He knows people in Rasa. So everywhere he goes, he knows people and interacts with them. So I think it's been a wonderful experience to actually shift dance also to Rasa, because now they have a more inclusive ecosystem for the arts, for the neurodivergent. So I think that's something I would encourage people to consider. If at all you're doing dance, what kind of an ecosystem do they have for it?
Thank you.
Any other questions?
One second.
I think there's a question
There
about
is
next
a question.
I think there was a question about next steps, and let me just answer that. What's the takeaway? So today, I'll just quickly recap today's takeaways. So one is, my big one is always 100-day, take small steps, and that's always my thing. Then there were other things we talked about, how to change your communication style, RDI, THD, several other things. And beyond that, we can look at it a little at a time, because we are doing these Wednesday workshops at 8 o'clock. So in those, we do look at specific things in more detail. So that would be a suggestion. Join the group, be on our email list. And as you spend some time just seeing what we are sharing, and then you will know what things you connect with and what's more relevant to you. Yes, anybody can join that FB group, yes. So just look for LifeSmart Parenting, or contact me on WhatsApp and I'll send you the link. Shilpa? Okay, so age to start Bharatanatyam, I would say maybe 5 or 6 would be good. Okay, so I think we talked about everything other than academics, but that's our journey. But I think you really have to build all these, once all these things are there, that's what you need to do the academic learning. So I think that was my point. You can't really hammer academic learning if somebody's not ready to read, cannot even sit down for 2 minutes. What academic learning can you do? You really have to weave it in through the connection, through the theater tools, through visual tools. So you really have to invest in all of these tools, and then gradually bring in the academic learning.
We have a question here who's asking, is 15 years too old for Bharatanatyam to start
No,
Bharatanatyam?
I don't think so. Any age is good, and now I'm forced to try it out with Anant, right? Just because, the reason I'm having to start is right now his new, the guru is very particular about smiling while dancing. So it's really difficult to just keep looking at the computer screen and smiling. So we've just made it a more social activity. So, if I'm close to 60 and I can try, what's the big deal with 12, and, they all look very young to me. Certainly you can start it.
Excellent, ma'am. Ocean of knowledge we have gathered today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we need part 2 also.
More than happy. Well, in the future, if you all want me to do a specific one, maybe one focused on just communication or just PhD, or, I think this was more of an exploratory thing to see what people are interested in. So then if you say, okay, more than happy to come back and talk again. But at least now the different pieces are on the table, what things we could have conversations on. So
Sure. Archana, note it.
So yeah, we'll take note of it, ma'am. And that brings us to the end of this very enlightening session by Rama ma'am. And on behalf of Tribe Abelora, I'd like to thank Dr. Rama for instantly accepting my invitation to be the guest speaker today. And I would also like to thank Meera ma'am for all the support she's been rendering for the webinars and being the strongest pillar of support for Abelora as always. And thank you very much. And until we see you next week, take care and bye bye. And we also have our, you can follow us on Insta and Facebook. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. See you next week.
Thank you,
at
Archana, and
Yeah,
nice to see you,
thank
Meera.
you. Yeah, nice. We had very great time with you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.
Thank you, Rama. Thank you.
Bye.
Great.